The next topic we can see Nana, audit of different types of undertakings. This topic will be for 10 marks Nana. Definitely one question they will ask for 10 marks. 10 marks is nothing but 7 marks they will ask one question and 2 marks they will ask for MCQ Nana. So it will include different undertakings. In the 2016 syllabus we used to have so many undertakings. Audit of independent undertakings we used to have so many things, but they have removed each and everything. Now we have to see the only audit of education institutions, audit of healthcare organizations like hospitals, audit of organizations in hospitality sector, banks, cooperative societies, local self-government. Only these things we have to see, and out of these 6 things compulsory he will ask one question. In the recent December 2023 attempt, they gave audit of educational institutions. They gave the audit of educational institutions. Out of these 6 topics, definitely they will give one question for 10 marks. So read with very carefulness Nana. Let us see audit of different undertakings Nana. In that, first one we can see audit of educational institutions Nana. We can see the first one is what Nana? Audit of educational institutions. How an auditor has to inspect and how auditor has to verify educational institutions. Educational institution of any state in India are generally established and run under the Society Registration Act 1960 or Public Trust Act of this state concerned. Okay na? Educational institutions in India Nana. So generally any educational institution which are being run in India, they are established either on the Society's Registration Act or Public Trust Act. Why? Because educational institution in India is only meant for service, but we know how far the educational institutions will be providing NGO services. Similarly, central educational institutions are guided by respective regulations issued by the Ministry of Education from time to time. In some cases, largely education institutions like universities are established by central or state government by enacting special legislation. The audit of accounts of these institutions is carried out as per the provisions of legislation or trust deed concerned. In addition, various circulars issued by the central government for institution are considered relevant in this aspect. The audit procedure for these institutions may consider the following aspects. First thing we have to understand the constitution. So in the case of that educational institution, we have to study the trust deed. For what purpose they are establishing this educational institution, under which regulation act they are covered this educational institution, and should take a note of provisions regarding the maintenance of accounts, how they are maintaining the books of accounts. In case of state or central university established under special act, study the regulations framed under the act. So when we have to audit an educational institution, first and the foremost thing is we have to understand the constitution. The first thing is what? We have to understand the constitution here. The first and foremost thing is we have to understand the constitution. Understand the constitution means what? We have to study the trust deed, whatever the deed they have formed, under which act they have established this educational institution, for what purpose they have established this educational institution, and should take a note of provision, what are the books of accounts they are maintaining in this education institution. In the case of state or central universities which is established by act, then we have to see the rules and regulations which are framed under the act. Next, access to internal control system. Normally these institutions will have well organized internal control system. So the auditor has to evaluate internal control system associated with acquisition and maintenance of assets, authorization of transactions, etc. before finalizing the audit program. So before finalizing the audit program, always the auditor's audit program will be dependent on various things, and the one and the foremost thing is based on the internal control system is also the reason the auditor has to go. The auditor will be deciding whether the auditor has to apply compliance procedures or the auditor has to apply substantive procedures. These things will be decided on the basis of verification of internal control system by the auditor only. So after the verification of the internal control system, only the auditor will decide whether the auditor has to apply compliance procedures, otherwise the auditor has to apply substantive procedures. Next, consult the minute book. The next thing is what? The auditor has to consult the minute book. Carefully examine all notices and minutes of meeting of governing body, senate, syndicate, court, council and other committees which affect the accounts and finance of the institute. Confirm the decisions taken for operation of bank accounts. What are the, who is going to operate the bank operations? What are the approvals required for expenditure have been duly complied with. So the auditor has to verify the minutes of book and he has to see whatever the meetings which is conducted by that institution regarding different approvals, like confirmation regarding the decisions taken for bank operation, who is going to operate the banks, who is going to approve all the expenditures which is incurred, and who is going to take care and who is going to govern the body, all the other things. The auditor has to see that. Consult the budget. Check the budget allocation to the different heads and confirm that all the amount sanctioned beyond the budget has been duly approved. So for each and every department, a certain budgets will be allocated every year. The auditor has to consult all the departmental heads and they have to verify if any amount is sanctioned beyond the budget, that also the auditor has to get approved. Next, verify receipts related transactions. Verify the receipts related transactions. Suppose tuition fees. Tuition fees. What auditor has to verify here? What is the auditor has to verify here? Tally the counter files of fee receipt with fee register to see whether they have been duly recorded or not. So in the case of receipt, first one is tuition fees. Tuition fees is nothing but like college fees, or otherwise we can say some other fees which they will conduct in different institution, different names. The auditor has to take the counter file of the fee receipt and he has to verify this fee receipt with the fee register. See whether they have been duly recorded or not, whether this fees register is recorded or not, that auditor has to verify. Check the register to identify whether all the students have been paid their fees in due time. So he has to take the students register and they have to see whether all the students they paid their fees on time or not. If any student has deposited the fees beyond the due date, check whether the late fine has been charged or not, whether the same has been properly recorded. In the case if the student has paid the fees late, in that case whether they collected fine from the student or not, whether that fine is also recorded in the book or not, that also the auditor has to verify. See whether all the collections are deposited into the bank account at the end of the day. Total up various columns of the fee register for each month and term to ascertain fee paid in advance have been carried forward and the areas that are irrecoverable have been written off under the sanction of appropriate authority. So now the auditor, every month the auditor, what he has to do, the auditor has to total up the fees register and he has to see if any student has been paid advance, the advances are carried forwarded or not. If any student is not paid and we are not able to recover from the student, then how did the management has written off under the sanction of appropriate authority. These things also the auditor has to verify. So under the verification of receipt related transaction, what the auditor has to verify? Tuition fees. In the tuition fees, the auditor has to take the counter file receipts of this tuition fees and he has to take the fees register. He has to verify and cross check them. And the auditor has to take the students register and to see, and he has to check that or whether all the students has been paid the student fees on time. If any student who is paying beyond the time which is given to him, late fine is collected from him or not, and he has to see whether the amount which is collected, whether it is deposited at the end of the day or not, and he has to total up various columns of the fee register and he has to see any fee which is paid in advance should be carried forward. Any arrear, if it is their fees that is irrecoverable, should be written off with the approval of appropriate authority. These are the things the auditor has to verify regarding tuition fees. Next, admission fees. Check admission fees with the admission slips signed by the head of the institution and confirm that amount has been credited to a capital fund unless management committee has taken a decision to the contrary. So whatever in each and every school or any institution wherever you are joining, they will expect a donation. Donation is nothing but they will collect in the form of admission fees. So whenever they are collecting the admission fees, they have to give a fees slip by the head of the institution, and whatever the amount they are collecting in the form of admission fees, admission is like a one-time non-recurring fee. Admission fee is a one-time non-recurring fee which is taken at the time of admission. Admission fee is a non-recurring fee which is collected at the time of admission, and it is collected only once when the student is admitting into the school. That is the reason the amount which is collected from the student, that should be credited to which account? Capital fund account. Next, the auditor has to verify other fees. Verify the collection of other fees such as library fees, session fees, development fees, hostel fees, etc. based on the counter files and fee register. Ensure that the fees have been accounted in appropriate heads. Like other fees, like we can see library, if a student is accessing to the library, then the student has to pay library fees for that. So the library fees should be recorded in the under the appropriate head, library department. Suppose the student is staying in a hostel, in that case the student has to pay hostel fees. In that case it should be recorded under the appropriate hostel head. So in that way the auditor has to check the counter files with those appropriate registers, and the auditor has to verify whether all the receipts are properly recorded in that register or not. See that all the areas on the account of fees, fines, etc. have been taken into consideration at the end of accounting period. At the accounting period, is there any errors on the account regarding fees and all fines which is levied? All these things have been taken into consideration or not? That also the auditor has to verify. C. Free studentship and concession have been granted by a person authorized to do so, having records to the prescribed rules. The auditor has to check any free admission is given to a student based on the prescribed rules. Then in that case the auditor has to check how did the student has been given and who has been authorized to do so, whether the person who has given this, whether he is authorized person or not. And any fee concession is given to any students, they have to take the signature of the concerned authorized person. They have to take the signatures of concerned authorized person. Confirm that hostel dues were recovered before student accounts were closed and the deposits of caution money refunded. So they have to confirm that hostel dues were recovered before student accounts were closed. They have to confirm that hostel dues were recovered and before the student accounts were closed, the deposits caution money refunded. So when a person is entering into the hostel on safer side, generally they will take this caution deposit. Why? If a student is going to commit any wrong or anything which he is going to commit, for that purpose they used to keep this caution deposit as a security money for security purpose. At the time when the student is leaving the hostel, then they have to close the student account and whatever the dues it is there, they have to recover from the student, and if any money which has been deposited by the student, that has to be refunded back to the student. Verify grants received from the government or any other organization based on the sanction letter and bank account. So the auditor has to verify any grants which is received from the government or any other organization. The auditor has to verify the sanction letter and bank statement. Ensure that donation received, if any, has been acknowledged and properly recorded in the books of accounts. If any person is donating any amount to the education institution, then in that case they have to acknowledge it properly and they have to record in the books of accounts. Check the income from letting out institutional premises based on the receipts issued to parties. Yes, in the case of educational organization, they used to get letting out income also. Let out income is like sometimes if they are giving parking contract to some other vendors, in that case they will get the parking income. If they are giving canteen to some other people, they will get canteen income. If they are giving the playing game court to other person, in that case that also they will get the income from that. In these kind of incomes, if education institution is receiving, that also the auditor has to check the same. Watch the income from endowment funds and legacies as well as interest and dividend from received investments also, and inspect the securities in the respect of investments held. So the auditor has to watch the income from which is received from endowment funds. Basically the endowment funds and legacies are the capital funds which is donated by a certain people for certain purposes. Any interest or dividend which is received from this fund accounts, the auditor has to inspect whether this amount is received or not received, whether it is recorded or not recorded. All these things the auditor has to verify. So these are the things an auditor has to verify regarding the other fees which auditor will, which the educational institution will receive. Let us recap once. Audit of education institution. Under the audit of education institution, first thing is the auditor has to understand constitution. Second thing is assess the internal control system. Third thing is he has to check the minutes of meeting. Fourth one is consult the budget. Fifth one is verify the receipt related transaction. In the receipt related transactions, in the case of education institutions, majorly there will be three income. One is tuition fees, one is admission fees, and the remaining all other fees. So they have to verify all other things, fees, whether it is received on time or not, whether they are recording the correct vouchers or not, and they are depositing the money whichever they are received or not, if they are diverting the funds or not. All these kind of things the auditor has to verify, and he has to confirm the same. Next, verify the payment related transactions. Verify the payment related transactions. Verify the salary and wages paid to the employees. In the case of government or aided colleges, verify that claims have been properly prepared and the amount sanctioned has been distributed to the right person. So the first one is verification of salary and wages to the employees. So in the case of education institution, the major expense will be salaries and wages to the employees. That is nothing but teachers or professors who are working in the educational institution. The majority of the expense will be spent towards the amount after the rent. After the rental for the premises, the major expense will be salaries and wages which is paid to the employees. That is nothing but teachers. So in the case of government colleges, they have to see whether the sanctions have been received properly or not. Whatever the sanction amounts which is received, that will be paid, that will be utilized towards the discharge of payments towards the employees or not. That also the auditor has to check. Check the calculation and accounting of arrear salary. See whether deductibles from the salary such as provident fund, income tax, TDS have been deposited with the authority concerned in due time. If not, whether the same have been accounted for appropriately. Now the auditor has to verify. So whatever the salary payments they are making to the employees, on that payments, whatever the statutory deductions applicable like provident fund, gratuity fund, pension fund, employee state insurance, all these kind of things, whether it is deducted or not deducted, the auditor has to verify. Yes, if it is deducted, then in that case after the deduction it should be deposited into that account. If it should be deposited into that statutory government account, that also the auditor has to verify. Deduction is happening or not happening. After the deduction, whether they are depositing or not depositing, both the things auditor has to verify. Examine whether all the expenditure associated with special events like seminar, symposium have been accounted for by matching the expenditure in this regard against the amount obtained by any organization or sanctioned by the institution itself. So whenever they are spending for the seminars and all, they have to see, so what is the expenditure they are expecting, that expenditure is given by the donor. In that case, whether they are matching the actual with the standard whatever they are expecting. Otherwise, if the education institution itself they are spending, then the auditor has to examine all the expenditure which is associated with special events. Watch all the regular expenses. What are all the regular expenses like electricity bill, telephone bill, internet bill, traveling expenses, stationery bill, etc. based on available vouchers. Then watch purchase of fixed assets. If any fixed assets are purchased, like expenditure for construction of college building based on the available purchase of available vouchers, resolution of meetings for purchase or finance committee, similar utilization of grants for purchase of fixed assets, library books, laboratory equipment must be separately vouched. So whenever an education institution is procuring any purchase of fixed assets like constructions or otherwise, if they are purchasing the benches for the organization, if they are purchasing equipments for the laboratory, and if they are purchasing the boards, if they are purchasing the tables, chairs, fans, AC, whatever the equipment the organization is purchasing, all these things should be vouched by the auditor with the relevant vouchers. Watch refund of caution deposit from the students based on receipts and accounting records. So whenever a student is joining into the higher section, then in that case the education institutions will collect a caution deposit in the beginning of the year itself, only because once the student is admitting into the college or an educational institution, if anything is committed by that student in a wrong way, then in that case whatever the damage which has the organization beard, that will be deducted from that caution deposit. Then when the students are leaving after their education from the college, then the caution deposit will be refunded back to them. So the auditor has to watch properly. So if the caution deposit, whatever it is deposited by the students, whether it has been given back to the students or not, if any commitment, if any damages which is committed by the student, the same has been recovered from the student or not, all these kind of things the auditor has to verify. Examine the payment on account of hostel facilities, including repairs and maintenance of hostel building, electricity charges, purchase of food items, etc. So the auditor has to verify if an education institution is associated with the hostel also. In that case, whether the hostel fees are being collected on time or not, and whatever the hostel expenses such as rental for the hostel building, maintenance fees such as hostel building and maintenance for the hostel building, and electricity charges, purchase of food items, all these items should be voiced properly by the auditor. See that investment representing endowment funds for prizes are kept separate. Any income in excess of the prizes has been accumulated and invested along with the corpus funds. Sometimes some people will deposit endowment fund for special purposes. If there is any endowment fund for prizes, that fund must be utilized only for distribution of prizes, not for any other purpose. After distributing the prizes, if any excess fund is there, that excess fund should be invested along with that endowment fund, and whatever the income which is generated out of that fund account should be credited to that fund account only. It should not be used for general purposes. So all these payment related transactions the auditor has to verify. So what are the payment related transactions the auditor has to verify? When the salaries and wages is paid to the employees, statutory deductions, whether deducting or not, whether they are paying or not, that auditor has to check. Examine all the expenditure associated with the special events like seminars, and they have to watch regular expenses such as electricity, telephone, broadband bills, traveling bills, etc. And they have to watch if any fixed assets are purchased by the educational institutions. They have to watch a refund of caution deposits to the students after the education is finished. Examine the payments if the hostel facility is there, if there any expenditure which is related to the hostel which has been incurred, whether it is also paid or not paid. And any endowment fund is there, and any endowment funds are created, then that funds must be utilized only for the purpose for which the funds are created. In excess amount will be there, that amount should be deposited back to the fund account, and the fund account should be invested. Any income which is generated out of that fund accounts, that should be credited to those fund accounts only. Next, verification of assets and liabilities. Generally in the case of education institution, we can see the majority will be what are the assets will be there. Like assets, the education institution like benches will be there, tables will be there, boards, whiteboards will be there, and apart from that property building will be there, and if it is a library, books will be there, and if they are having a laboratory and the equipments will be there, and if there is any sports area and the sports equipments will be there. So these are the majority of the assets an educational institution will hold. Liabilities means if they are borrowing loans for construction of a building purpose, generally these are the major liabilities which institution may arise. Conduct physical verification of tangible fixed assets as shown in the fixed asset register. So the auditor has to take up the fixed asset register, and he has to verify physically the tangible fixed assets. Verify investments based on investment register. The auditor has to verify the investments based on investment register. Check whether depreciation and amortization has been provided as per the policy adopted. The auditor has to check whether the depreciation and amortization has been provided as per the policy which is adopted. Verify the refund of TDS in the respect of interest on investment. If any interest is received on investment, they have to verify the refund of TDS. Any TDS is refunded back on that investment, that is also the auditor has to verify. Carefully examine all the outstanding liabilities such as electricity, telephone bills, outstanding TDS, PF not yet deposited. So the auditor has to carefully verify, and he has to concentrate on outstanding expenses, either anything it is electricity or telephone bill, TDS deducted but not deposited, PF deducted but not deposited. All these things the auditor has to verify very clearly. Verify the inventories such as furniture, stationery, clothing, provision and all equipment, etc. Clothing is nothing but uniform. So this should be checked with reference to the stock register. All these things should be verified by the auditor by using the stock register. Ascertain that system ordering inspection on receipt and issue of provisions, foodstuffs, clothing and other equipment is efficient and the bills are duly authorized and passed before the payment. So the auditor has to ascertain system ordering inspection on receipt. System ordering inspection on receipt means what? Food items, we can say food items, clothing, other small equipment, stationery, these things they will receive on regular basis. So there should be one person, whenever they are receiving these items, they should inspect. Whenever they are receiving these items, they have to inspect immediately, and after that they have to pass the payments. That is how they should be there, system should be there. That is, these are the items which are covered under the verification of assets and liabilities. If any long-term loans are borrowed for the purpose of construction activities and all, whether the interest is being paid on regular basis or not, that also the auditor has to verify. Next one is verification of financial statements. Verify that financial statements such as income and expenditure account and balance sheet have been prepared in the form of manner which is specified by the regulatory authority. If the educational institution is registered in the form of a company, then compulsory as per Schedule 3, Part 1, Part 2, they have to prepare their balance sheet as well as income and expenditure account. Suppose if they are maintaining their books of accounts on the cash basis, if they are running in the name of NPO, then in that case they have to maintain their books receipts and expenditure book, or otherwise receipts and payments book, or otherwise income and expenditure book they have to maintain. So these are the items they have to verify. So these are the items which are covered under the audit of educational institutions. Once again, let us revise the audit of educational institution. What are the things the auditor has to verify? First one is the auditor has to understand the constitution. The auditor has to understand the constitution, whether the registered in the name of trust, for what purpose they registered, under which act they registered. In the case of universities, whether it is approved by central or state government, and what are the rules and regulations which has been framed. So he has to understand the constitution. Second one is the auditor has to assess the internal control system, because based on the assessment of internal control system only the auditor can design his audit program. The auditor has to consult the minutes of book meeting, because then only the auditor can understand certain things, what are the decisions which are taken by the educational institution. Consult the budget. The different budgets will be allocated to different departments. If any department is spending beyond the budget, necessary approvals should be obtained. Next one is receipt related transaction. Majorly educational institution will have three types of fees. One is admission fees at the time of admission, that is a non-refundable fees. Generally these admission fees should be allocated, should be transferred to capital fund account. Why? Because this is a non-recurring fee. And the second one is a tuition fees. This is a recurring fee which will be received from the students. So the auditor has to check whether these fees are being received from the students or not, and he has to check with the fees register also, and he has to check with counter files whether they are matching or not. And the second thing is whether all the students, the auditor has to verify whether all the students they are paying the fees on time or not. If any student is paying beyond the date, whether they are charging, they are levying late fines from they are collecting from the students or not. Whatever the amount they are collecting from the students, whether they are depositing on recurring basis or not. All these things the auditor has to verify. Third one is other fees. There will be certain other fees which will be collected from the students also. Like if a student is staying in hostel fee. If a student is staying in if a student is accessing the library, then library fees. If a student is accessing to the any sports arena, then sports fees. If a student is writing examinations, different exam, preparing for different national level examination, then examination fees. All these are the different fees which will be collected from the students. The auditor has to verify whether these fees which are collected from the students have been classified under appropriate heads or not. Next, any student free concessions are given to the students based on the prescribed rules. The auditor has to verify that concessions as well as free studentship. Confirm the hostel dues which were recovered. So confirm the hostel dues are recovered. When we are returning the caution deposit fund to the students, we have to verify whether the student is vacating the office premises or vacating the hostel premises or not. At the time of vacating the hostel premises, whether all the dues related to hostel is recovered from the student or not. That also the auditor has to verify. If any grant is received from the government, bank statements the auditor has to verify, and sanction letter auditor has to verify. If any donation is received by the education institution, that should be properly accounted in the books of accounts. And if any institutional if any income is arising by letting out institutional properties, in that case also the auditor has to verify and watch the same. And if any endowment funds are created in the education institution, if any interest income or dividend income is received out of that endowment funds, that also the auditor has to verify the same. Payment related, when the salaries and wages are made to the employees, statutory deductions whether deducting or not, whatever the statutory deductions they are deducting, whether depositing on time or not, that also the auditor has to verify. And the auditor has to verify with the expenditures whether like annual day celebrations or otherwise seminars which is conducted by the education institution, whether it is a sponsored, whether it is matching with the budgeted and actual. And in the case of education institution itself, that also the auditor has to verify the process. All the regular expenses the auditor has to verify, like electricity bill, traveling bill, stationery bill, telephone bill, broadband bill, all this kind of bills. Next, when the auditor is verifying the fixed asset, the auditor has to pick up the fixed asset register, and the auditor has to verify all these fixed assets are physically existed or not, depreciation is properly calculated or not, all the other things also the auditor has to verify. And refund of caution deposits also the auditor has to verify properly whether any amount is deducted from the caution deposit for any wrong damages which is done by the students or not, that also the auditor has to check properly. And any outstanding expenses which is which is not paid at the month end, that also the auditor has to verify. So these are the different things the auditor has to verify. Verification of assets and liabilities. So conduct the physical verification of tangible fixed assets. They have to see the investment register in that case, and any amount, so whatever the physical assets which is existed, whether the depreciation and amortization correctly calculated or not calculated, any TDS refunds are there, any TDS is deducted on the interest on investment, in that case the refund also the auditor has to verify. Any outstanding expenses are there, that also the auditor has to verify. Inventory stock is there, the inventory should be verified with the stock registers properly. And verification of financial statements, the auditor has to finally verify after the once all these things are verified, the auditor has to verify the financial statements of income and expenditure and balance sheet, whether it has been prepared in the specified manner, like in the case of education institution is registered as a private limited company or a company, public company. In that case, if that is the case, then compulsory they have to prepare their books of accounts in the manner specified in Schedule 3 Part 1 and Part 2. Otherwise, if the education institutions are set up under Cooperative Society Act or running for NPO, not for profit purpose, in that case they have to maintain receipts and payments book and income and expenditure book, complying with the accounting applicable standards. So these are the items which we have to verify in the case of educational institutions. Next independent undertaking audit do we have is audit of healthcare organizations. The next independent audit do we have is what, Nana? Audit of healthcare organizations. Here healthcare organizations primarily include two things. One is hospital, another one is nursing homes. So what is the difference between hospital and nursing homes? You people also know hospitals will be like corporate level, or we can see the multiple number, hundreds of beds, multiple number of beds and multiple services will be available. Whereas in the case of nursing homes, only we can get a very limited services for limited diseases. That is the major difference between a hospital and a nursing home. In the case of nursing home, only very limited services we will get over there for small diseases. But whereas in the case of hospital, you can get a treatment for any kind of diseases also. Healthcare organizations primarily include hospitals and nursing homes. They are established to provide medical services to the public. For what purpose these hospitals and nursing homes are established? For providing medical services to the public in need. These hospitals run and funded by the government or local authorities are run by charitable trust. So basically these hospitals run and they will be funded either by government, either by local authority, means the state within the city, or by any charitable trust. So these hospitals will be running basically when three funds. One is either by government will be running this hospital, or local authority means like BBMP7 local authority like that, or otherwise any charitable trust. Like we can see many types of charitable trust will be open. Hospitals we can see like like Chiranjeevi Charitable Trust is there, like blood, for the purpose of blood and eye donations. We can see Basva Tarakara in the name, like Nandamuri Tarak Ramarao. We can see cancer hospital. Like we can see different types of institute, like Satya Sai we can see in this white field also, that is also related to eyes and all. So like that, different hospitals, they will be opened in different names. These are generally non-profit seeking organizations. These organizations generally will not, these organizations are not opened for the purpose of profit. These organizations are basically not opened for the purpose of earning profits. These hospitals are opened for the purpose of providing services to the public. However, hospitals may be established by private sector organizations also. Yes, these are profit seeking organizations. Here hospitals means not only government or local authority or otherwise a charitable trust. Apart from that, there are many hospitals which are running by a private people, like Apollo we can see, Yashoda we can see, Medicare we can see, Medicure we can see, Sunrise we can see. There are many hospitals in the society which is running on by their own by a private people. Those kind of organizations we can say private sector organizations. The main agenda of the private sector hospitals will be profit. The main agenda of the private sector will be profit. In the case of government hospitals, it will be service motive. In the case of private hospitals, profit will be their main motive. So in the case of government hospitals, service will be their main motive. In the case of private hospitals, the main motive will be the profit. Since healthcare organizations largely differ from other commercial organizations on the account of their business processes, the procedure or the process in the case of healthcare organizations will be completely different comparing to the other organizations. An auditor needs to prepare sound audit plan to cover typical aspects of these organizations. So in this case, the auditor should have a first of all proper knowledge about this kind of nature of business, and apart from that, the auditor has to prepare a sound audit plan in order to audit these organizations. The audit procedure must highlight the following steps. Whatever the audit plan which is prepared by the auditor, the audit plan must highlight the following steps. Understand the constitution. Study all the relevant documents to determine its nature and ownership structure. Study the trust deed, partnership agreement, articles in MOA. Accordingly, identify the rules and regulation relating to its management and process of preparation of accounts. So, understand the constitution. Understand the constitution means what? The auditor has to study all the relevant documents to determine the nature of organization. If it is set up by the government, the ownership will be who? Government. The funds will be sanctioned by the government. In that case, the auditor has to study the government deed, government entity, like whatever the under what they have opened, government, under which nature the government has opened, what are the rules which has been framed for this hospitality, that the auditor has to see. Next, if the hospital is opened in the name of a trust deed, in the name of a charitable trust, in that case the auditor has to read the trust deed. What is the main motive, what is the main purpose? They opened this hospital in the name of the trust, for what purpose, to what are the different kind of services this hospital is providing to the people. So all these kind of details should be read from the trust deed. Next, if these hospitals are opened in the name of partnership, partnership means when more are people, when two or more persons are combining together to do the business. In the case of that, in that case, the auditor has to read the partnership deed, for what purpose this hospital has opened and what are the services they are planning to provide to the general public, and what is the main motive, to earn the profit or otherwise to provide service. All these things also the auditor has to verify. Next, if the health organization is opened in the name of a company, then in that case completely he has to read, he has to go through the memorandum of association, articles of association, and he has to identify the applicable rules and regulations, and what is the management, and what is the process of maintenance of books of accounts. All these things the auditor has to understand in the constitution. Second, assess the internal control system. Yes, an auditor before drawing an audit program, he has to assess the internal, he has to evaluate and assess the internal control system with its acquisition and maintenance of assets. So how? they are acquiring the asset, on whose approval they are acquiring the asset, how they are maintaining the assets, whether they are having yearly contractual agreements or what, and what are the, how they are authorizing the transactions, how they are approving the transactions, etc. All these things the auditor has to assess. So the auditor has to evaluate the internal control system of the organization. Based on the assessment of internal control system only, the auditor can go further. The auditor can plan audit program. The audit program of the auditor will be mainly dependent on the internal control system. If the organization internal control system is a well organized structure, and if it is strong, the workload of the auditor will automatically reduce. The workload of the auditor will get reduced. Suppose if the internal control system of the organization is not an organized structure and it is like a very weak, in that case the auditor has to go with compliance audit procedures. The auditor needs to verify each and every aspect in a detailed manner. It is completely depends upon the internal control system. Next, consult the minute book. The auditor has to carefully examine the notices and the minutes of meeting of board of directors management committee in order to understand whatever the decisions which is taken by these organizations. So what are the powers given to the different people, what are the roles and responsibilities of the different board of directors, what is the role and responsibility of the CEO, what is the role and responsibility of the CFO, manager, any person. And to appoint any person, they will conduct a meeting. In that meeting they will approve and they will sanction the powers and they will give roles and duties to the different peoples in the organization. These things the auditor can understand by reading the minutes of book. The auditor has to carefully examine this minute book and he has to understand all the things, all the things regarding functioning of an organization. Next, verify receipt related transactions. So in the case of hospitality, the major income will be the patients. In the case of education institution, how the students will be the major income. In the case of hospitality also, the major income will be what? The major income will be patients. When they are treating the patients, after the treatment, whatever the amount they will collect, from the patients, that will be treated as the major income. In case of hospital run by state government or by any local authority, watch the grants received from the state or local authority based on government orders, sanction letters, counterfeit of receipts. So in the case of hospital run by state government, if any hospital is running by a state government or local authority, so the auditor has to watch the grants which is received by the government. Why? Because in the case of government hospitals, no one will be, each and every service will be at free of cost. Then how the doctors will get their salaries, how the hospital will run, how the medicines they will get based on the grant. Generally these hospital sectors which is run by the government, they will receive the grant from the government. So whatever the grant which is received, the hospital has to maintain books for spending all these items, and government, whatever the sanction letters they will receive from the government, that also they have to maintain, and whatever the counter files they will receive, that also the hospitals has to maintain. That should be verified by the auditor. Watch collection from the patients admitted to paying the beds based on the patient admission register and counterfile the receipt of copies of bills. The auditor has to verify from the patient whenever they are admitting into the hospital for any services. So the patient will pay some admission fees like 500 or 1000 rupees. These admission fees should be verified with the help of admission register. Whenever a patient is admitted into the hospital, they will record all the details of the patient in admission register. So the auditor has to collect the information from admission register and he has to verify this admission register with the admission fees which is collected from the patient. Watch collection from various pathological tests based on the counter files of receipts and copies of bills. Means in the case of hospitality, to decide anything, nowadays the doctor requires reports, blood report or otherwise sugar report or otherwise lung report, scanning report, kidney report, some more other report the doctor requires. Without report, the doctor cannot confirm anything. The doctor cannot confirm anything. So if any test is undergone by the patient and if any patient is paying the amount towards these tests, then the auditor has to verify the same regarding the receipt. Watch the donations in this kind, generally in the case of government hospitals, generally the people who is having a plenty of surplus money, he will be donating to the hospitals for providing services to the general public at a free of cost. So whenever these hospitals are receiving donations from the general public or any person or any businessman, they have to maintain the counterfile receipts of those donations. In case hospitals having guest houses, access the collection based on the register. So in the case of hospitals, generally along with the patients, one or two people who, in order to take care of the patient, they will be coming to the hospitals and they will be staying along with the patient. In that case, guest rooms will be provided to those patient relatives. Guest rooms will be provided to that patient relatives. Then in that case, if any amount is collected towards that guest houses, then the auditor has to obtain the register of those guest house, and the auditor has to verify the counterfile receipts, how many guest houses are occupied on daily basis and what is the room charges they are charging. Why? Because generally the room charges also will be different. If a person is admitting into the hospital, also we can see, depending upon the type of admission, the hospital bill will be there. If a patient is admitting into the general ward, the bill will be different. If the patient is admitted deluxe room, the bill will be different. The patient is going into the super luxury room, the bill will be different. If a patient is admitted in ICU, bill will be different. If a patient is admitted in NICU, the bill will be different. If it is a OP patient, the bill will be different. So there will be different types of receipts from the patients. So in the same way, guest houses also, different types of guest houses will be there. In that case, the auditor has to obtain the register related to guest houses, and the auditor has to verify on daily basis how many number of rooms are being occupied in the hospital and how these people are collecting the fee, how these people are collecting the amount from the relatives of patients. Interest or dividend income should be vouched with reference to the investment register. Suppose if the hospital is having any surplus income, that surplus income has been invested in any shares of the company, and they have invested in debentures, they have invested in fixed deposits of the banks. In that case, from time to time, the auditor has to verify investment register, what are the amount which has been invested in different areas, different segments, and the auditor has to see whether the hospital is receiving regularly, interest on the fixed deposits or not, whether the hospital is receiving the shares, a dividend on shares which is invested or not. All these things the auditor has to verify on regular basis. In case of legacies and donations which are received for specific purpose, it should be ensured that any income therefrom is not utilized for any other purposes. Generally, in the case of hospital, how the educational institution legacies and donations will be there. Generally, these legacies will be, legacy is nothing but any person who is donating money towards an organization for a special purpose. That is called as a legacy. That is a capital fund. Generally, will record on the balance sheet. These legacies are recorded in the balance sheet. These legacies are recorded in the balance sheet. So any amount which is received in the form of legacies or donations, the auditor has to thoroughly verify them. So why? Because in the amount which is received towards the legacies, the auditor means the organization has to spend towards the said purposes only. Suppose a person has donated 1,000 crores towards a hospital only for the treatment of cancer patients. Then out of that legacy fund, whatever the amount which they have received donation, that amount should be utilized only towards the treatment of cancer patients. Again, other than cancer patients, we should not utilize that funds. And apart from that, if that legacy, whatever the amount which is received by the hospital, 1,000 crores, they won't keep idle in the current account. They will invest this amount, like the amount which is parked in the legacy, it will be investing in different areas. So when this amount is being invested in different areas, in that case, they have to see what is the interest received. From legacy. And that too, whatever the interest income received, that interest income should not be taken under the revenue account. It should be added to that fund account only. That also the auditor should be carefully examining. Why? Because generally the accountant, whatever the interest amount received from that legacy, he will take into the general account and he will use for general purposes. But the auditor should not permit that. Usage of interest or dividend income which is received from legacies, that must be utilized for that said purposes only. These are the things the auditor should verify in the case of receipt related transactions. In the case of receipt related transactions, if it is a government hospitals, we have to verify the government grants, sanction letters, we have to verify. In the case if it is through patients, we have to verify the admission register, how much amount we are receiving from the patient at that by using this patient admission register. If the patient is undergoing any pathological test, any amount which is collected towards that also the auditor has to verify. If any person is donating towards donations to the hospital, the donations also should be verified. If relatives are accommodated with the patients, they will be staying in the guest houses of the hospital. So if they are collecting any revenue for those guest houses, the auditor has to check the register regarding that also. Next, if the hospital is having a surplus income, if they are investing, then the auditor has to verify investment register. Any interest income or any dividend income which is received, that also should be added to those investments. Here we can take it as a, here we need not to add to the investment. Here we can take it as a revenue incomes. Interest and dividend received, we can take it as a revenue income. Why? Because these all are not for specific purpose. These all are not for specific purpose. This interest and dividend we can credit to profit and loss account. Next, in the case of legacies and endowment funds, the auditor has to very carefully examine whether this amount which is received towards this fund accounts is used for only set purposes, not for other purposes. So these are the transactions the auditor has to verify regarding receipt related transactions. Next, what are the things the auditor has to verify? Payment related transactions. The auditor has to verify that all the capital expenditures which are associated with the machineries, furniture, vehicle like ambulance, etc. is approved and supported by the documentary evidences. So in the case of hospitality, the major thing they require is hospital equipment, hospital beds. They require the oxygen machines to supply the oxygen to the patients. They require the heartbeat machines to see the pulse of the patients. Apart from that, they require a hospital different equipment for surgeries and all. Now the auditor has to verify the capital expenditure whatever the hospital has spent, and the hospital has acquired these assets like ambulance. They require to transport the patient from one place to another place, to carry the patients from one hospital place to another place. Otherwise they require oxygen cylinders for supplying the oxygen to the patients, and the X-ray machines for taking the X-ray, scanning machine for taking the scanning, MRI for taking the total body scanning. Like this, the hospital require different machineries. So being an auditor, the auditor has to verify the physical existence of all these assets and the payment which is made towards these assets, whether it is a capital asset or revenue expenditure. That also the auditor has to verify. In the case of capital expenditures, the auditor has to see whether it has been properly authorized by the board or not. Without the prior permission of the board, they should not spend capital expenditure. Revenue expenditure, they don't require board permission, but in the case of capital expenditure, compulsory they require board approval for the same. Next, salary paid to the staff. Salary paid to the staff is nothing but this is one of the major expense for the hospitals. We can see they will be making the payments to the doctors, staff nurse, ward boys, cleaning staff, reporting staff, ambulance drivers, all these people, receptionists. So all the supervisors, all these people, they will be paying salaries. So whenever the salaries is paid to the doctors and the staff, then they have to examine whether all the statutory deductions which are applicable to that salaried employees has been deducted and paid, and the same amount has been deposited or not. That also the auditor has to verify. Verify the doctor's remuneration based on the number of visits. Generally, in the case of doctors will be paid based on the number of visits or the number of patients attended. If that is the case, the auditor has to verify the doctor's register, how many number of visits made by the doctor, how many number of operations or surgeries performed by the doctor. That should be verified. Verify purchase of pathological test kits, X-ray plate or other consumable based on the tenders or orders placed and invoices received. The auditor has to verify if any pathological tests or medicines or X-ray plates, whatever the things which is purchased by the organization to perform the operations. Next, any other overhead expenses like regular expenses in the hospital like telephone bills, electricity bills, fuel bills and water bill, etc. All these bills should be properly, documentary evidences should be verified by the auditor. So these are the things the auditor has to verify. The first one is capital expenditure. So for the purpose of capital expenditure, compulsory they require the board approval. Next, revenue expenditure is salaries paid to the doctors based on number of visits, salary paid to the other staff like nurses, ward boys, cleaning staff, supervisor. For all these people, they have to verify whether the statutory deductions which is applicable, like doctors professional tax, they have to deduct. For all other employees, they have to deduct the applicable TDS, income tax rates, PF, then gratuity pension, all those things they have to verify. If any stock is consumed, if any stock is purchased, that should be verified with that stock register. And overhead bills like telephone, electricity, water bill, fuel bill, food items, medicines, etc. All these things should be verified by proper documentary evidences. Next, verification of assets and liabilities. So generally in the case of hospitality, the majority of the assets will be, one is hospital building, if the building is owned by the hospital. Next we can see the chairs, beds, chairs which will be used for using the sitting purposes when they pay for visitors of the patients. Another one, the beds which they will use for patients, like hospital equipments like scanning machinery. And apart from that, office office equipment such as like a system, computer system which they require, and apart from that, AC environment which they require to maintain in ICU or NICU environment, and apart from that, office scanning machines or otherwise X-ray machines or any other machines which they require to perform, robotic machines which they require to perform the surgeries. So the auditor has to check the fixed asset, the auditor has to collect the fixed asset register, and physically he has to verify all the assets whether is in physical existence or not. And the second thing, the auditor has to verify for all these assets, whatever it is recorded in the fixed register, whether they existed or not. If existed, so what is the rate of depreciation they are calculating, how they are charging the depreciation for these assets, that also should be verified by the auditor. Next, in the case of stocks such as medicines, injections, tablets, syrups, if it is maintained in the form of stock medicine, then in that case a separate stock register should be maintained by the pharma. Separate stock register should be maintained by the pharma. And if in the case of hospital, if they are providing the food, next a separate stock register should be maintained by the canteen. And if the hospital is having the dry cleaning and washing services, in that case separate register should be maintained by that source dry cleaning people. So for each and every department who are providing services in the hospital, they have to maintain separate registers. By using those registers, the auditor has to verify the items. Suppose in the case of medicine, the auditor has to check whatever the medicine they purchased from different pharma distributors, how much they consume towards the patients and how much is left over in the stock, that the auditor has to verify and the auditor has to confirm. Next, food items, they have to see the canteen, how much food quantity they are purchasing and how they are preparing the food, what are the food items they are purchasing, and to how many patients they are supplying towards the food item. All these things also the auditor has to verify. Then conduct the physical verification of fixed assets and investments based on fixed asset register. One is they will use in the hospital some fixed assets. When the hospital is having a surplus amount of funds, then the hospital, they will invest these funds in the form of other areas. Sometimes they will invest in the properties where they will receive property rental income. They will invest in the areas in the shares where they will receive the dividend income. They will invest in the areas like debentures where they will receive the dividend interest income. Different areas they will be investing. In that case, the auditor has to verify with the investment register. Next, Nana. So the auditor has to conduct, in the case of investment, the auditor has to check the investment register. What are the places, where are the places the investment have been invested? Based on that, the auditor has to verify. Check the adequacy of depreciated and its accounting. So what is the method of depreciation they have followed? Already we discussed in the last classes also. If a person is adopting one method of depreciation, the same should be continued over a longer period of time. Unless there is a benefit or change in the statute or law, they should not change the method of depreciation. So whatever the method of depreciation which is followed for accounting purposes is different, again income tax purpose is different. So if that is the case, the auditor has to check whether the depreciation is calculated properly or not, whatever the additions which is made in the year, whatever the separations which is with assets, whatever the assets which is sold in the year especially. So the auditor has to check depreciation is calculated properly or not. If the assets are disposed, any profit or loss which arises from that sale, that also the auditor has to check. Collect the list of all liabilities and verify them based on the contract and arrear bills. If there is any liabilities or obligations which is there pending on the against of hospital, if that is the case, the auditor also should verify those pending bills or outstanding bills, and any outstanding bill which is related to the current year compulsory, it should be recognized. If there is any prepaid expenses or prepaid bills which is paid in advance, those things we have to minus and we have to show under the current assets. So liabilities also the auditor has to verify them in contracts. So but generally in the case of hospitality is only the majority of the liability will be towards vendors, that bills will be there. If they are constructing the hospitals, they will avail the loans. In that case of availing the loans, we have to see and we have to classify what kind of loans they are availing, whether it is a short term loan or long term loan, whether they are repaying the interest on regular basis or not. All these kind of things the auditor has to verify and has to report in the audit report. Last one is verification of financial statements. The auditor has to verify financial statements has prepared in the manner and the format appropriate to the nature and the ownership structure of the organization. Why? Because the financial statement in the case of government hospital, it will be different. Why? Because it's a purely NPO service. So they will prepare receipts and payments account or otherwise income and expenditure account. In the case of profit seeking organization like private limited or public limited companies, they will be covered under the Companies Act 2013. Then they have to prepare their books of account, they have to maintain and they have to prepare their financial statements on the basis of Schedule 3 Part 1 and Part 2 of the Companies Act 2013. So this is how, basing on the nature and structure of the organization, the auditor has to verify the books of accounts and financial statements and to comment upon. So these are the items basically we have to verify in the case of a hospitality. So here if you see the steps which we have to follow in the case of any entity, any independent entity, that is same. Only the thing is the matter inside the entity, depending upon the nature of business, depending upon the structure of the organization, it will change, but everything remains the same. So these are the things which we have to verify on regular basis.